Hey everybody, my name is Nick. I am the Communications Director here at Arlington Community Foundation. As you may or may not know, it is National Make a Will Month in August. And in preparing for doing some promotion around National Make a Will Month, I realized that I myself, embarrassingly enough, do not have a will. So I thought that this would be a really good opportunity to talk to an expert about the subject for myself personally to learn, and then also to share that with anybody who's watching this who might not have a will, might be thinking about one, might be hesitating to make one. So without further ado, I want to introduce our very special guest, Drew Murray. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been in practice now for about 12 years with Manning, Murray, and Baxter here in Arlington. We do estate planning and estate and trust administration. So that's all we do. We have a pretty narrow focus, but you'd be surprised at how interesting things can get and how many issues actually are in this field of estate planning.
So, going back to wills, my first question is, what happens if I don't make a will? Why do I need a will? For my personal circumstances is I'm not married. I don't have any kids. I have a wonderful dog who I would leave everything to if I can. I don't know if that's something I can do with my will. Excellent. Yeah. So both for me and for anyone who doesn't have a will, what happens if we don't make one?
So where the will comes in versus not having a will is, with a will, you get to say where it goes, or with a trust. In the absence of that, Virginia law says, here are your heirs at law. And it's kind of, if you don't have a spouse or children, it's your closest living blood relatives. Let's say you had your pet and you wanted to take care of, you would want to specify that. Otherwise, everything's just passing to your closest relatives, and you're going to hope that they do the right thing by you.
And I will specify that for sure.
Yeah.
Is there a certain threshold when it comes to the complexity of your assets that you would recommend going through a professional when it comes to setting up your will versus maybe just finding a tool to do it yourself?
The algorithm on a website isn't necessarily going to clue you into the types of decisions that go into actually coming up with a person who's going to be in charge to make it in the documents. And I don't know that it's necessarily ever strictly tethered to how much you have, because it doesn't take that much to trigger probate. But I would say, obviously I'm an estate planning attorney. I prefer that people come to me than to do the website will, because people come in with those and they want me to look them over, and I say, I prefer my forms, and I think we should make this more bulletproof. So my feeling is everyone should go through this planning, whether it's on LegalZoom or they have an attorney. However you can do it. It's a good exercise. It's an important exercise that could save family members some grief. They'll have grief in another way, but additional grief.
Yeah. So let's say someone is starting completely from scratch. They don't know where to begin in this process. What would be the first step, and what would the expectation be as far as how hard it's going to be just to get the ball rolling on this process?
So how long does it take is kind of an interesting question, because very highly motivated people, and in that case, sometimes it's, I'm going on an African safari in 2 months. Well, they're very motivated to look at everything and have questions so that we can finalize in 2 months. And some people have a very difficult time just emotionally thinking through all of these decisions. If I'm gone, who's going to take care of the kids? Or if the kids are gone, who does everything go to at that point? But it just depends. But you could have a will in hand, signed within a month of meeting. It's possible. It's not that common, but it's definitely possible.
I think I'm one of those people who I've hesitated because you do have to face your own mortality as you're going through this process. So I'd say for me, it's that, and also just the unknown of the cost of going through the process. So if you are to go through an estate attorney, is it still valuable for people at all income levels to consider?
And it's definitely, when you're thinking about any attorney, using any attorney. It's more expensive than something like the LegalZoom
Right.
is going to be, right? But whenever you get a fee schedule from a law firm or an attorney, I mean, there's always some discretion there to reduce the fees, right? We have a good sense when we meet with somebody, how complicated will this be? You know, somebody with $40 million needs a very complicated plan and several trusts potentially, right? So we know, well, that's going to be more than just a simple will. This is an unmarried person. They need a will. They just need the basics. Well, it's not going to be LegalZoom, but it's not going to be several $1,000s, right?
Awesome. Well, that's really good to know. Once you have that in place, how easy is it to make changes once it is in place?
Yeah, sometimes I have a couple with young kids, and 5 years after I do their documents, they say, hey, you know, we have concerns about the guardian that we named or the trustee. We think we want to swap it out. Well, if there haven't been any major changes in the law that required drastic changes to the form, then it's easy enough to just kind of save a new Word version, swap out a name, and they print it and sign it again. I mean, honestly, the hardest part about it is getting them to come in, finding a time to sign because it needs to be notarized. But it's shockingly easy these days. Everything's computer-based.
I was personally curious about this. Are there any situations where you wouldn't recommend someone to have a will? I was thinking somebody who may be in like massive debt. Is that? And this is just a personal question. This doesn't even have to be on video. Like, I was just very curious about that. Like,
so even then, you still want to, even if you have no assets, if the cost of having the will prepared isn't an issue, it makes sense to have a will, because you name an executor who's going to be able to close out your final business, let's say, or has the authority to pay whatever bills you're able to pay, and then your name is kind of off the books, right, at that point. And it's a lot easier to name an executor in a will and just make an appointment with the courthouse to record the will than it is to qualify as an administrator without a will, particularly if there aren't clear family members who would be that person. So I don't know if I would ever recommend someone not have a will proactively.
So I was just curious, like, what role does the Community Foundation play in being part of a will? If I'm looking to leave money to charity in my will, what's the benefit of doing that part through the Community Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just makes everything really organized and just simplifies the process for the executor or the trustee who's dealing with everything. It also makes planning a little easier too. I actually last week had a situation where a client had an investment account that was designated to 10 different charities. And I was on a call with the financial advisor, and he said, this is going to be a nightmare to have each one of these charities separately fill out the paperwork with me and then divide everything into try to divide these shares into partial shares. So if they had used, and I suggested this to her, if we went with a legacy fund at the Community Foundation, everything can go to the fund and it's handled through you guys. And if there are changes on the thinking of these 10 charities instead of equal, I want to distribute it a little more heavily to these charities, or I'd like to swap out a few charities, then that process with you is really easy, and it doesn't require formally amending your documents or even changing beneficiary designations on an account, which even that involves getting the tax ID numbers for each of the organizations and their principal office address, and it's more complicated than you would think. So there's a big benefit, I think, to streamlining with the Community Foundation, and that's a recommendation I give all the time to clients.
Awesome. Yeah, you heard it from Drew right there. This has been wonderful. I'm learning so much about wills, about estates, about the Community Foundation. This has all been so helpful for me personally. I hope it's helpful for anyone who's watching this. Before we close out, is there anything that you wanted to add that we may have not touched on?
Check those beneficiary designations. I think a lot of people, if this is my PSA, is people have this moment of relief when they sign their wills or their trusts and they say, all right, that's it, I'm done. But the beneficiary designations what will save people a lot of grief. So everybody check those designations and And whether it's with an attorney or LegalZoom or something similar, just do the planning.